I'm Joshua Kemble. I'm a full-time art director. Have been doing that for about 7 years. And then on top of that, have been and still am a graphic designer and illustrator for over 15 years. And this is my vlog where I talk about my personal projects and kind of process ideas and thoughts about art, generally on my way to work, because I have a long commute. I live in California and on an artist's salary. There's specific areas in California that I can live and afford to have a house, and certain areas I can't. And so I have to commute to an area I can't from an area I can, and thus the long commute. But that's actually an okay cost. I don't mind that exchange because I love where we live, and I also really dig being an art director. It's a challenge, and it's constantly fascinating and cool, and you learn about people, and you also just overcome challenges and hurdles every single day to kind of make the best art that you possibly can. And something about my mind, I think that's why I like comics too, really enjoys the challenge and the kind of impossible task nature, the puzzle, the problem-solving puzzle of art direction. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me. Now today I'm heading to work, and I've just been thinking a lot about why I chose to do two stories, my graphic novel about faith and mental illness that I handwrite, hand letter, and hand inked. And it's 122 hand lettered, hand drawn pages of comics, and it's out from Marcosia Enterprises, and you can actually get a copy on Amazon right now at like a really super discounted rate. Let's see. So what I was going to talk about was why I picked doing a project like that rather than something that might be more commercially viable. And then I also wanted to kind of throw out a question to you guys, like as artists, at the end, hopefully to get you thinking about what you think your life's call is, as corny as it is. So basically, like, why I chose to do two stories, and this is gonna sound really over the top and ridiculous, but it's like I've had this feeling my whole life that I was supposed to do comics, that I was supposed to do cartooning. And then as I've gotten more and more into cartooning, I got more and more into the idea of autobiographical narrative, and especially for myself. I like a lot of things. There's so many things I love about comics, but there's something about comics that I can't quite pin down, but that I think is like really unique and awesome for autobiography. I think it's because with a printed comic, when you sit down to read it, there's a very intimate exchange going on between the reader and the artist, where you feel really, like, I know growing up, when I read a comic, I felt like really connected to it in a way that books didn't draw me in. And I loved books. Like, I was a big book nerd growing up. But there's something about, like, with a novel, your imagination would go wild, like, based on the words that the author wrote. And so if they structured the words correct, like, well, and it connected, there was this beautiful experience of kind of losing track of time and almost losing sense of location, and you could get lost in a totally different world, or get lost in a world of somebody you really empathize with, and it would maybe push the boundaries of your thought. At best, maybe it would like be life-changing in the sense of like present ideas and thoughts that that were so well articulated that it made you reshift and restructure the way you thought. And then at the worst, which is still a good, given that the story connected in some way, it's an escape from everyday life and entertainment, right? So on the higher end, you have like philosophical challenges and deepening of thought and a furthering of a sense of identity, right? And at its lowest, and I don't mean low in a negative way, I just mean like the lowest amount of what you get from it is escape and entertainment. And so that's a really cool thing. But with comics, I feel like there's something when you add the visual into that equation that's more personal from the artist, especially cartoonists. And I'm talking by cartoonist, I mean people who like write and draw their own comics. There's something very intimate about not only getting language cues from the artist, but actually getting some visual cues and getting visual symbolism, visual communication, which is a powerful form of communication because it can express things that words can't. And when combined with words in a narrative, it can further a narrative to areas that hypothetically, like, text alone can't go. But there's something about that, like sitting down, having that experience of seeing like a visual story and having it kind of guide you into territories where your imagination, while it can go wild and your thinking can be challenged, it's somewhat more controlled. Like, you get a much more intention from the author. You have less imagination of what the characters look like, but your imagination is also engaged, similar to reading books where you're filling in sort of what happens between the panels, and you're still intuiting what the artist's intention was, and you're still having the potential of getting ideas and thoughts that might further your identity, like further your search for identity, further your sense of who you are, and stuff like that. So to me, that's comics. Comics feel to me at their best, even action comics and superhero comics, at their best, it feels like you've stumbled upon a journal, like a really interesting, fascinating journal, like a diary, and you get to peruse it and get this sense of of connection with like the person who wrote it. And I think that's unique to comics, and I need to rethink this and reformulate it to be a little more coherent, but this is just a random spitball idea here. But I think that's why I like doing comics, and particularly why I'm drawn to autobiographical comics. There is a connection that comics can make that I think are really unique to that medium, that like I don't think a film can have. Although I love movies, and I don't think a novel can have. There's this particular comic book connection, and it's worth pursuing as an artist, making that connection through your art, and I think it's worth pursuing as a reader, because having that connection when you're reading, feeling that connected with characters, with the visual. And also feeling that sense of ownership, because there's still, unlike a movie, there still is much more participation from the reader in the in-between panel phases and in the choices to like read at a certain tempo And some of that can be controlled by the writer and the artist, but some of that's up to you as the reader. And so because it requires a little bit more involvement and engagement, I think it actually creates a more invested, creative form of storytelling that has more buy-in. And then also, just from the perspective of somebody who loves art, comic books have multiple challenges for an artist. You have the challenges of telling a sequential story, which are an immense amount of challenges. You can talk to any children's book artist who takes the medium seriously and know that there's so many choices that you have to make when you're making a kid's book. And you also have to learn a little bit of like stagecraft, like in the sense of costuming and staging and lighting, and how you're going to have your little illustrated play out. Are you going to be literal or metaphorical with your imagery? How are you going to have your page turns work? Are you going to have double page spreads? Are you going to do full bleed? Are you going to have repeated themes and repeated imagery and iconography throughout? And then if you're going to have any of that, like the big question of why, is it furthering the emotional impact of the text? And you have that to consider as a cartoonist as well, but you also have the complexity of panel design, which makes the challenges of a page tenfold, because now you have to basically design a bunch of little pages within a larger page and see how they interact with each other. And then you have timing, which is a very unique thing to comics. I think comics, unlike any medium, really have at their best like control over the time that a reader is going through it. Anyhow, these are all just random thoughts, but point being, I love comics, and I love that part of comics, that thing that I feel is unique to comics. And I feel like it's very unique to printed comics. I think maybe the iPad, maybe reading on a tablet could get close. But there is something about sitting down with that printed book, just you and the book, and really just getting lost and absorbed in a story and allowing it to make you think, and choosing the time along with the author and artists, and that exchange. I think there's something like, weirdly enough, there's something spiritual about that. So, why am I doing two stories? So, like I said, I've always felt like I was supposed to do comics. I've always felt drawn to comics. There's something about comics, and I think I touched on some of those things that just connect with me deeply on a level that other mediums just don't get close to doing. And then why I chose the subject matter that I did was, I actually felt and feel to this day that it's an important story that I need to actually tell. And by important, I don't mean that it's going to be like some great literary work. It's that I sincerely am convicted, and I feel in my heart that this is a story that I need to actually get out there. Like, it's an important story. And it has to do with my own life, but the importance of it just seems important, like, for multiple reasons. One is, there's a lack of stories out there that talk openly about mental illness and mental health. There's a lack of stories that talk about being a victim of violent crime. And like the PTSD that follows. There's a lack of stories that I think depict relationship struggles due to mental health, caregiving struggles, panic disorder. All of these things are themes that I'm talking very openly and vulnerably about in my book. And I think they're important to talk about, and I don't think there are enough people talking about it. And I feel like the more people who talk about those kinds of things, the more it will sort of like normalize what is viewed as like this thing to be avoided, I think, by society in general. And I think that's an important thing to do. And then I also just feel like I have a story I have to tell. And the beauty about stories is there are some stories that maybe linger in our imagination as creators that we kind of build and we enjoy. But there's something mystical about storytelling to me and about making stories that I think is really awesome, which is kind of gets into this territory of philosophy of like, where does an idea come from? Where do we generate ideas? And you can talk about different techniques to generate ideas, but there really is something about identity and authenticity in an idea and idea generation. And something abstract about where ideas themselves come from. There are a few philosophers who used to think that, and I think this is an interesting thought, that like when doing mathematics, you're not really making inventions because you're finding formulas that already exist. It's just that you're discovering formulas. Like, so when you come up with a new mathematical formula, it's not like you're inventing it. It's like it's a truth that's out there that you're touching. Like you're sort of touching base with. That's an outer truth that you find, and it becomes an inner truth. And it's a weird thing, but I think that somehow, and I'm still kind of working this out, like a better way to kind of articulate this thought. But I think that the act of being creative ties into that. I think that we are, strangely, by participating in storytelling, we are touching base with something bigger than ourselves, even if it's a personal story. And I think it's the human need in general. Like, there's a human need to tell stories. And then I think there are some stories that just scream so loudly to an artist that like literally have to be told. And strangely enough, that's one of the main reasons why I decided to dedicate about 5 years to the first book, and why I'm going to dedicate more years to the next, is that I've thought long and hard about what to do as an artist, what I would find fulfilling, what creative challenge do I want to take on, and why I'm doing art. Am I doing art to make money is a good question. And as an art director, I do art to make money all the time. I mean, and making money and making a living doing art is awesome. It's a blessing. It's a cool thing to be able to do. Regardless of the field, it's definitely a minority style of job. Like, it is not an easy job to get. It's not an easy job to maintain. And it definitely is like a talent-based job where it's like you have certain amounts of talents and skills that you have to perfect in order to do it. And not everyone can do it. Most people, I think, personally, my own philosophy about art is that anyone can draw and anyone can do art if they dedicate themselves to it, if they learn the foundations. And then it's more about like them expressing their own identity and finding their own voice in this realm of visual communication. And I think the more voices, the better. The more diversity within those voices, the better. But that's a sidetracked tangent. My point is, 2 stories is my voice. It's my imperfect story that I need to tell. and that I think is important, and I actually think people should read it. I think it can have some lessons in it and offer some insight to people that I think is really important for people to have. And it's from my own life. And that sounds, I know that can sound like slightly narcissistic. I know that in engaging in doing autobiographical work, that inevitably it sounds a bit narcissistic. I also know that it's a long road ahead with that book, because while I would love it if I had like this gigantic publisher and, you know, tons of readers, that's just not the case. Like, I have a really awesome publisher who took a chance on it, Marcosia Enterprises. But like, my readership is still growing. It's, you know, I'm not sure, I haven't seen my sales numbers, but I don't think they're like breaking records. I don't think the book's going to be on any New York Times bestseller list or necessarily like picking up any big awards. I'm giving it the opportunity to have the success that it's going to have, but I'm having to fight for like every single reader, and for every eyeball on it, and for every click or purchase, you know, because it's an indie comic, and I'm an unheard of to most people. So why am I doing it, considering those things? And that's what I wanted to get into. I think that it's an important story, and I think that as artists, and this is where it gets to you guys, and I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments section and stuff like that. But I think as artists, we should be questioning what we're doing as artists, if what we're doing is important, even if it's providing escape or entertainment. Like, that can be really important for people. And is what you're doing something you would do if you weren't getting paid? Because I think in life, I think often when we think about priorities and ideas and stuff like that, and sort of plans and what exactly we want to do, I personally think we should be pursuing the kind of stories that we would make whether we were paid or not. And I'm not saying we shouldn't get paid, because I think artists should get paid, and frankly, I think art and comics and cartooning in particular are very undervalued in our society. But because of how hard comics are, how much of a time investment they are, because of the fact that, you know, success in comics still doesn't necessarily equate to like a solid, great living. I think that you're better off picking a story and working on building things that you think are important enough to where if your vision, because everyone's vision when they make a comic is, then I'll get 1,000 readers, then I'll get 1 million readers, then it's going to be on the bestseller lists, then, you know, even if it's like an online comic, then it'll get all the internet traffic, then I'll be able to make a living at it, all of that. That's everybody's goal, making comics. I mean, I can't imagine anyone making comics who wouldn't want to get paid or make a living doing what they're doing. So that goes without saying. But being that it's such a difficult thing to get off the ground, and there's a limited amount of readership out there, and sure, you can expand that base, and you can try to get more readers, and I think that's a really worthwhile and good pursuit, and I wouldn't want to dissuade anyone from that pursuit. But my point is, because it's a hard slog, because they take forever, because they're not the best paying form of industry, although, like, you know, the exceptions are very big exceptions. You know, I think I mentioned on Artcasters last night that, like, Raina Telgemeier, I think, is, like, paid better than, I'm guessing, like, anybody in Scholastic right now. She makes a very hefty living, I think, from making comics. that a lot of people making just regular books aren't going to see in their lifetime. But I would say this same thing for like a novelist. Like, your success rate is really low. This isn't to discourage you. It's just that, like, the amount of books that go from being a book to a bestseller are very, very small amount compared to the amount of books that end up getting pitched and rejected. And books that get accepted alone and published are in the minority. Books among those that actually have any bit of reasonable sales are really slim too. And so if you're going to go into writing or creating stories, just storytelling in general, I think you're better off picking something that you want to defend and fight for, whether it's going to sell or not. And I think that's a really important thing and something to consider. So that's my question to you guys. Like, the comics you're working on right now, the stories you're working on right now, if you thought about it, like, first off, is this something you'd want to do whether you get paid or not? It's a good question. Number two, is it something that you're going to want to defend and fight for and promote like hell and go to bat and and make this like your objective to like sell it no matter what? And if the answer to either of those is no, I don't want to ever dissuade anyone from doing any form of creativity. And again, it goes without saying, I'm a guy who's an art director in California. I'm not an art director for like a mega corporation. My name is likely not known by hardly anyone. So take this with a grain of salt. Like, I'm no authority. The only sense I can only speak from just my experience and over a decade of working in industry and my love for comics, and as somebody who's made a graphic novel, I have a publisher, but that doesn't give me authority. Like, it's not a huge publisher, it's not a best-selling graphic novel, right? But here's the thing, I still, and again, I'm just speaking my own opinion, I think that if your answer to those questions is no, then I personally think even if you have success with what you're doing, you may not be content, and you might not be happy as an artist, and you might not be happy with the work. And that's the thing. I think that when you're pursuing comics, the beauty of this industry being so kind of all over the place and tough to navigate, tough to make a living in, is that it gives you a certain freedom to pursue what stories you think you should pursue. Pursue making and dedicating the time on those stories to make it the best you possibly can, so that when it comes to it being put out, if it has success, you're going to be elated because you've invested your heart. And if it's not a success, you'll still feel good because you invested your heart. It's going to hurt a little bit to see that book that you worked on, that story you worked on for a long time, potentially not achieve the heights that you wanted it to. But if you have that hedge of creating something that you know is valuable and good, and you've invested the time to make it good and to make it valuable, and you've picked a story that you think is important and worth the investment, like a story you wouldn't feel good about just crapping out a page on, like a story you would feel okay like laboring over the pages and spending the time that it takes, that it should take to make those things. I think that if you those two questions I think are really essential, and I think that if you are like, yes, this is an important story to me, I would do this if I didn't make money at it, and I would go to bat for this because I'm so happy and content with the story. Maybe there's elements that need work or whatever, but this is something I wouldn't mind going to bat for and fighting for until it sells. Okay. Allergy attacks coming up, so I'm gonna call it, but that's just my thought for the day. I hope you guys are having a real success in your creative endeavors, and I hope you guys are all getting closer to achieving your goals as an artist. I know for me, I am still on a path, and I'm still on a journey, and I'm still I'm very excited about the vaccine being in full effect on Monday, because that can help me to start to actually make a game plan for marketing my comic in person, like doing more stopping by stores, potentially booking conventions, all of that fun, exciting work that I want to put into my book because I think it's worth it. So yeah, that's gonna do it. And I'm gonna basically let you guys go. And I hope that was an interesting thought for you guys. Again, let me know in the comments section your thoughts. And of course, this is my channel, so if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, hit that like, leave a comment, like, and share this video with other artists. All right, with that being said, I'll see you guys on the next Vloggins. Bye.